Okay, so the title is, we're talking today about the building of the Beis Hamikdash. So let me just give you a little bit of background, and since this is like a one-time stint, I want to encourage any questions. If we could, in other words, if we could have any ideas that are followed through and complete, that's something that I would definitely welcome, and I hope that you would as well. So, in Jewish tradition, every month has a theme, and the 15th day of the month represents the peak. Like, that's the time that all of us who are involved in the theme, whatever it means to us, at that day of the month, it should be at its height. Right? We should be walking around exuding whatever energy that month represents. This is why, Kabbalistically, the holidays, the festivals of Pesach and Sukkot are on the 15th day of the month, because that's the appropriate time, day 15, when the energy is at its peak. The Jewish people are compared to the moon, having good days and bad days is part of the package. It's not something to be discouraged by. That's how it works for the moon, waxing and waning. And some of the months we have to take a closer look. They aren't so obvious. So the Rebbe always looked to tease out the uniqueness of the time. It's not just another day, business as usual. There's always something. So in 1992, so this coming Shabbos, we're going to be blessing the month of Teves. The month of Teves in Jewish tradition, historically, the month of Teves, what does it contain? It contains the first fast day in the cycle of fast days relating to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. It represents the day when the Romans put a siege on Yerushalayim, which lasted 3 years, and that ultimately led to the destruction of Yerushalayim. Now, in Jewish tradition, halachically, if the 10th of Teves would occur on a Shabbos, we would fast. It's the only fast day that, besides Yom Kippur, that overrides Shabbos festivities. Now, technically, because of the way the lunar, it's not the lunar calendar, because of the way the Jewish calendar is set up, it never occurs currently, but during earlier period, when the calendar was set by the moon, by witnesses and so on, without going into how it worked, it did occur. Now, let's remember that the fast days are of rabbinic origin, right? They're not in the Torah because they relate to the destruction of the temple, and they are mentioned in Scripture. Okay, so it's in the Torah, it's in the canon, in the books of the prophets, right? Ezekiel and Jeremiah talk about the coming destruction, right? They prophecy that in the future the temple is going to be destroyed if people don't improve their conduct and so on. So it's in Tanakh. It's not rabbinic in the sense of like the Gemara or the Mishnah, right? But it's not part of Chumash. It's not one of the 613 commandments. So today, the 10th of Teves can occur on a Friday. Generally, we're not allowed to fast on Friday. There's only one exception, when the 10th of Teves falls out on Friday. Okay? So that's one thing that we find in the month of Teves in Torah. Now, another thing that we find in the month of Teves is that Tevet, is the month when Esther, Queen Esther, was brought to Achashverosh for the first time. The Talmud in Tractate Megillah just points out that when it's cold, people enjoy others' comfort. There's more pleasure in being together with someone. So that idea, that phrase in the Talmud of Haguf nene min haguf, that essentially that bodies enjoy contact, is something that we find in Kabbalah and Hasidus, referring to a more spiritual concept. What do we mean? What concept? What idea? That the idea of guf means existence. It's going to be a little bit abstract. I don't want anyone to tune out. The idea is simple. That our reality is very real. In other words, to us, we truly exist. God is a mystery, but God is the true existence. Right? We feel like we're a true existence. In our perception, the way we feel, right? We exist. God, we don't. It's intangible. In truth, God's existence is real. So it's like two bodies. There's like two realities. There's our reality and God's reality. And the idea of the guf, nene min haguf, is the possibility of appreciating true existence by reflecting on the way we perceive our existence. In other words, understanding the way we feel and applying that to the truth of God's existence. I want to just explain a tiny bit more. In other words, generally, when we think about spirituality, we think about abandoning the body. The body is an obstruction to spirituality. Spirituality is more in the mind and in the heart. In other words, in meditation, we look to move away from the physical senses, right? We're going to close our eyes and be very still and try to be in a more transcendent state. The idea of the month of Teves is to learn from the way the body feels and to apply that to Hashem's existence. Okay? So that's the second thing that we find. Any questions? No questions? That's so.
Sorry, I heard that this is not the true. This is not the truth. This is the truth will be in the other word, right?
Right.
But we think that is. No, it's okay. No, it's complicated to explain.
Okay. So here we have two ideas about the month of Teves. Now let's talk a little bit about. So let's get to the Beis Hamikdash for a minute. The prophet Yecheskel sees a prophecy about the destruction of the temple and also about the siege that precedes it. And God, in this vision that he has, that's spelled out in the Navi, God tells him to take a frying pan and to place it as a separation between him and an object. And God says that this this metal object represents this metal wall that will be formed around the city of Yerushalayim. Now the metal wall isn't an actual wall, it's the siege, where no one will be able to go out or to come in. Okay, so he foresees that there's going to be this siege on Yerushalayim. The object is metal. Now, when King David built the city of David and owned the Temple Mount, he bought the area of the Temple Mount. He wanted to build the Beis Hamikdash, and God told him famously that he doesn't have the right. He's not the right person to build the Beis Hamikdash because his hands are full of blood, because of all the wars that he fought. And God says to him, your son, Shlomo, from the word shalom, peace, it'll be peace, there'll be peace during his reign, and he'll be the one to build the Beis Hamikdash. Now, King David is not satisfied. I mean, he understands that he won't be able to build the Beis Hamikdash, but he's obviously disappointed. And he sets a goal for himself to prepare everything that will be needed in the future. So David goes out, he goes shopping for all the materials that will be needed in the Beis Hamikdash. Now in the Navi, right, in the prophets, there's an inventory of everything that David collected, gathered, all the materials and the amounts, right, the measurements, exactly what he prepared. And then he tells his son, here's everything. And just to mention that when the Beis Hamikdash was completed, the gates, the doors of the Beis Hamikdash were sealed shut, and they couldn't open the doors. They were praying, and the whole story. And then Shlomo was standing in front of the doors, and he says, dear God, open the doors for the sake of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for the sake of this one, Moshe, this one, the matriarchs, the patriarchs. Nothing's happening, right? The doors are sealed. Then he says, please open the gates in the merit of my father, King David, and the doors opened. So it says that day, the shame that David had from his enemies was removed. In other words, people scorned David. People said, oh, David was a sinner, right? King David was, the reason why he couldn't build the Beis Hamikdash is because he was a sinner. In other words, he told them because of the war, but they didn't accept it. That was between him and God, right? The people, David had adversaries, and they said the reason why he couldn't build the Beis Hamikdash was because he wasn't fit, because he sinned. In other words, not because of the war, right? They had other. So then, when the gates opened, so the shame was removed. In other words, that he did tshuva or however. So one of the items that are listed in the Navi is metal, iron. We have other metals, gold and silver and copper, but also iron. Now, in the Beis Hamikdash, we don't. In the first and second temple, we don't find any iron being used. The Hebrew word for iron is barzel. The word barzel is a. I'll give you some background soon about this, but it contains the acronym of the names of the four matriarchs, the four wives of Yaakov: Bilhah, Rachel, Zilpah, and Leah. Okay? Brazil, yeah, that's right. Okay, so Barzel, okay? Yes, that's the same spelling, right? So I'll get back to this model of the acronyms. I'll talk about it soon. So King David prepares this material, it's not used. Now, in Jewish tradition, iron represents destruction, it represents death. Now, this begins all the way back from the Torah. In the Torah, right, in Chumash, with the building of the Mishkan, God says to Moshe, you may not raise any iron over the stones of the Mizbeach. If a stone of the altar of the Mizbeach is touched by a piece of metal, it becomes unfit. Okay, so it doesn't have to make a scratch or whatever it is. Just that there's contact. The pasuk, the phrasing, the language in the pasuk is very interesting, right? You've raised the iron over. So there are two different, regulations with the stones of the Beis Hamikdash, of the walls. They could use iron, however, they can't, not on the site of the Beis Hamikdash. So they would have to pre-cut all the stones wherever they were working on it, and then when they would bring it, it would have to be ready to use, right? No fixing or sharpening or smoothing on the Temple Mount. With regards to the Mizbeach, no contact, period, no metal. So either they have to find stones that are perfectly shaped for the Mizbeach, or they would use the shamir, that worm that would cut the stone. The stone of the Mizbeach, for us, is very easy to understand. It's like marble. It has to be perfectly smooth. We have to check the smoothness in the same way that we check the smoothness on the knife of a shochet. So if by running your fingernail over the surface, there's any area where the fingernail gets caught, it's unfit. In the Beis Hamikdash, there was a chamber that contained all the stones that could no longer be used of the Mizbeach. Okay, so it was a thing. There was a room just to store the stones that could no longer be used. That's where they put the stones after the story of the Greeks. I'm just using the word Greeks loosely. It's not a, okay? So now we find, just to talk a little, what do we find in halacha? In halacha we find there are different customs, but in Chabad custom definitely, and some communities will not use iron, metal, as a casing on a mezuzah. Why? Because iron or metal is it symbolizes shortening life.
Shorten.
To shorten. Look at, you speak a little Hebrew? No? Okay.
Shorten.
Yeah, to shorten life.
Why?
And by killing. Because the sword, right? Whereas the mezuzah, in the mezuzah it says that if you practice this mitzvah, you will have a long life. So we don't want to place the mekatzer, the one that shortens, on top of, over the one that extends life. Okay, so that's something that's still practiced to this day. So now going back, King David prepared iron for the Beis Hamikdash, but it wasn't used. So what's the story with that? Why did he prepare it, and what's the story with it? And then how does this connect? Remember that in the prophecy of Yecheskel, the pan that God asked him to raise was of iron, and that represented the siege on the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so now you have. Let's take a look. What are the numbers on the papers that you have?
231, 232.
Okay, good. Thank you. So, how many read Hebrew? A few? Okay, yes, yeah. So maybe we'll use the papers as props. Okay, don't worry so much about reading it inside. So in other words, I'm presenting a little bit of a question, right? And then, in other words, why did King David prepare iron? What's the idea of the iron pan in the prophecy of Ezekiel? And how does this all connect to the month of Teves, which we're blessing this Shabbos? We're not blessing, we're starting. We blessed it last week. Okay, so there's a famous Rambam. The Rambam, Maimonides, writes in Hilchos, in the laws of fasting, right in the beginning, the opening of the laws of fasting, the Rambam writes that when something bad happens in the world, it's important that we use it. Bless you. That we understand that there's meaning behind what happens, and we should look to improve our ways. He says, someone who looks at the world and says that when something happens, it's just hapstance, there's no significance, they're being cruel. In a general way, there's a difference. This is not in the Rambam, I just want to bring out a certain point. There's a difference between the way we view our own suffering to the way we view the suffering of other people. They're completely different. And it's very, very important to see it, to understand that in Jewish tradition. In other words, I could look at my own challenges and attribute certain areas of improvement that are necessary in my life. But I may not ever, God forbid, look at someone else who's suffering and say, it's because you need to improve something in your life. Anything, when we see someone else suffering, it's always unjust, yeah? It's always unjust, it's always unfair, it's always wrong, right? God is wronging that person, and we're asking God to stop. We pray for it to stop. We don't say, oh yeah, it's justified, they need a little cleansing. Okay, God forbid. So this idea of the Rambam, when the Rambam says that when someone experiences something negative, and they dismiss it, right? You know, people will tell you, most problems, it's like, let's say you're driving a car. Some of you have a car, you know, right? So there's a little squeak and you don't pay attention, right? The next thing you know, you have to make a big improvement, right? If you would have taken care of it when, right, in the building, you see a little crack, well, right, 5 years from now, you have to take out all the bricks and replace half of the building, right? And it's that way in everything, in every relationship, in every area. It starts off small. If a person just says, no, whatever, right, we ignore it. The Rambam is saying when something happens, when you yourself experience a challenge, it's a message. It's always a message. Okay? Now, when we talk about the experience of the Jewish people as a nation, and we say, oh, as a nation, whether you're a Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Hasidish, Litvish, Yeshivis, Misnagdish, Belz, Tzanz, Kloisenberg Square, right? Right? The 4 fasts are universal, right? All Jews mark these fast days. They're not particular to one group. It's about the temple. The temple, we were all in the temple together. So, in the process of what happened, the 10th of Teves, no one was harmed. Right? There was a siege, but no one was harmed. Right? It started. So, ideally, it would have been nice if we got the message then. In other words, how often does a person get a sign that that they should improve something about their life, and there isn't already something broken? Right? It's like you're getting a sign at a very, very early point. No one was hurt yet. Nothing terrible happened. Nothing happened, right? If somehow we could get into a good place right now, then everything will go well. Right? I know that examples aren't necessary here. It's very clear. So, in other words, the fast of the 10th day of Teves represents the ideal model of a day of a fast day. We get a little indication. We do tshuva and we're back in business. In other words, no one has the right sense to always walk on the perfect line, that the Rambam speaks about, which you also find in Greek thought, about walking in the middle, right? Of living this perfectly balanced life. Not being too generous or too stingy, too kind or too mean, right? Just to be right in the middle, right? How many people, who even knows where that place is of perfection, like that perfect balance? So we're always a little bit off. We're a little too hungry, we ate a little too much, we slept a little too much, we slept a little too little. Right? Exactly. So the minute you're a little bit off, and you get a sign that you're a little bit off, and you align yourself, and so that the month of Teves represents the ideal day, fast day. Even though it's the most, because it's the beginning, it's the most severe. Because before that, we were in a time of peace and, right, everything was fine. But on the other hand, it's idyllic, okay, in that certain sense. So, what we call Eis Rotzen. Okay, now I want to read a little bit inside. I want to start Dalet. It's the last line on page 231. For those of you that read Hebrew, if you could follow along inside, the last line, 231, the column on the left. V'yesh lahoisif. The Rebbe is here to add bebiur inyanoi, to explain inyanoi hamiyuchad, the special dimension, the special aspect of Asara B'Teves. We're on the page. We're on top of 232. Hein b'negea lahatchalas hachurban de Beis Hamikdash, both regarding the beginning of the destruction. Ve'hein ubeikar, most importantly to the Rebbe, he wants to talk about b'negea lahaschalas hageula, the initiation, the beginning of redemption, with building the Beis Hamikdash. And the Rebbe brings these ideas. I'm going to read for a few minutes, if you could try to follow along, and then we'll go back to this acronym thing, to the Roshei Tevis. B'hanegea lahamatzer al Yerushalayim, with regards to the siege on Yerushalayim that happened on the 10th of Teves, Matzinu, we find the Nevuas Yecheskel, in the prophecy of Yecheskel, and the Rebbe quotes the verse. Ve'ata, God says to Ezekiel, you, kach lecha, take, machavas barzel, a pan of iron, v'nasata oisa, place it, kir barzel, as a metal wall, an iron wall, beincha uvein ha'ir, between you and Jerusalem, etc. Gomer, etc. And then God says, v'hoisa b'motzer, it will be under siege, etc. Ois hi lebeis Yisrael, this is a sign for the Jewish people that this will happen in the future. I'm reading the parentheses. Shekach tavoy Yerushalayim b'matzor, that Yerushalayim will enter into a siege. V'yesh laimar, now the Rebbe adds a message. Shebehasimen, in the sign, lehamatzer, the sign is al yedei barzel, with metal, with iron. So nirmaz, there's a hint, churban Beis Hamikdash, gam, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Why? Ki barzel, because iron is mushlal, is forbidden, is rejected in the Beis Hamikdash. There was no metal, there was no iron in the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. I'm just going to mention that during the time of Hanukkah and at other times, they made additional menorot. Okay, they made candelabras, they made additional menorahs, and some of them were made of iron. And that's something that we find in Chazal, we find quoted in the texts. So the Rebbe said, well, you see, they did use iron in the Beis Hamikdash. Says yes, however, they were coated with wood. In other words, the iron wouldn't show. So, in other words, the support, the core of the menorah was iron, but it was coated. Okay, they would wrap wood around the iron. Also, just one other thing, on the top of the walls of the Kodesh HaKadashim, of the Holy of Holies, they put like iron prongs, like we have out here to keep the birds off of the ledges, right in front of the building. So they had the same thing in the Beis Hamikdash. And those were made of iron. So a question, so we see that in the building of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Rebbe points out that the Gemara says that the roof, the gag of the Beis Hamikdash was not holy. In other words, if a person is impure, they could walk on the roof of the Beis Hamikdash. It did not contain the sanctity. It's considered outside. Okay, maybe some of you might have heard this idea that people would enter the Holy of Holies to inspect the building, the structure, and to do repairs. They would enter through the roof, they would enter through the top, and that's not considered entry. So in a certain way, it's like they're not there, right? It's not like a proper entrance. So I'm just continuing inside. K'moisha Kosov, the Rebbe brings the verse, the Habayis, the Hibanoto, when they built the temple, was Even Shlema, whole stones. Umakavot, the Hagarzen, axes and picks, Kol Klei Barzel, anything made of iron, Lo Nishma Babayit Bihibanoto. The sound of clicking iron was not heard on the Temple Mount. Kivon, why? Because iron is Shaykh L'Churban Beis Hamikdash. That's part of that represents, it symbolizes destruction. Ki de'isa b'medrash, like the Medrash states. V'zo tatruma, these are the donations that are brought to the Beis Hamikdash. Zahav, gold, silver, copper, but we diverse in Parshas Teruma. Avol barzel ein ksiv kan. There's no mention of iron. Lo b'mishkan, v'lo b'mikdash, not in the tabernacle, not in the temple. Lama, why? Shenimshal bo Edom, shehechrivu beit hamikdash. The nation of Edom is compared to iron, who destroyed the temple. V'hatikon lazeh. How do we repair the symbolism of unholy iron? Al yidei barzel de kedusha, with holy iron, with holy stubbornness, let's say. Okay. Now I'm going to skip the next paragraph. The Rebbe brings that in the Talmud there's an excerpt that a Torah scholar who isn't like iron isn't a Torah scholar. In other words, there's a certain strength that's needed. I'll just mention as a note, when a person comes to ask a question, a halachic question from a rabbi, there's a challenge in the exchange. Because halacha, law is law. I don't know how many of you have been in front of a judge, but there shouldn't be any emotion, right? It doesn't get emotional. This is the law, this is the law, right? We're applying the law. But when a person comes with a question, you want to hear where they're coming from. But what you're applying is sterile. It's unemotional. It's like, it's a fact. What's the halacha? Is it kosher or not? Is it permitted or not? So there's a certain strength that's needed, that a person comes to you, they ask a question, there's something that depends on that question, they need your help, and you could only provide for them what halacha provides. You can't, halacha isn't flexible. Right? So there's a certain, there's a certain, which is being compared, a certain stubbornness, or a certain, which he compares to iron. It says, the last paragraph on the page, V'inyan zeh, this idea of iron, shayach b'miyuchad la'asara b'tevis. It has, right, is uniquely connected to the fast. Ki kavonas hamotzer, the purpose, the intent of the siege. Motzer bilvad, only a siege. Lelo pigi'ah, without hurting, without damaging, afilu b'chomat Yerushalayim, not even the wall, not even the exterior. Hoisa, we turn the page, please, the next page. Le'oreir al hatshuva. The purpose was to awaken people to do tshuva. And if the people would do tshuva at that time, even the wall would remain whole. Kedei shagam chomat Yerushalayim, even the wall, tisha'er, should remain. V'tihiyeh b'shleimuta, should remain whole. What does that symbolize? V'inyan ba'avodat Hashem. What does the wall of Yerushalayim represent? Hashmira, protecting the Torah, al shleimut haTorah, right? Keeping the Torah whole, uncompromised. Ani choma zu Torah, right? He brings here a pasuk which the Gemara brings, that the Torah represents a wall. Be'ofen shel chayzek v'teikef de barzel dikdusha, with steadfastness, with strength, like holy iron. Avoneha barzel. We'll talk about that later. Okay, now skip one paragraph. The next. Isa b'medrash. The medrash says. Let's see here. That Zohav, Kesef, and Nechoshes, gold, silver, and copper, Haim, Keneged, Gimel Ha'avot, correspond to the three patriarchs. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Zohav ze Avraham, Avraham represents gold, Kesef, Yitzchak, Nechoshet, copper, Yaakov. Al pi hayadua, it is known, Shegam Batei Mikdashot, the three temples, Haim Keneged, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. They correspond with the patriarchs. Avraham, Shakatuv Bahar, Yitzchak Sadeh, Yaakov Bayit. It's not important for now. Yesh Lomar, we can say, Shezahav v'kesef u'nechoshet, hem keneged gimul batei mikdashot. Zahav, gold, keneged Bayit Rishon, corresponds to the first temple. Kesef, silver, keneged Bayit Sheni, the second temple. Nechoshet, copper, keneged Bayit Shlishi, the third temple. Now one would say, wait a second, copper is cheap. Why would that represent the third temple? Maybe it should be reverse. So let's take a look. So the Rebbe speaks about, I'm going to skip to the next paragraph. V'yesh lahosif, to add, shenechoshet, the word for copper, Romez gam al hamaymed umatzav dizman hagolus, represents exile, the long exile, the extended exile. La'acharei churban bayit sheni, v'ilu hashleimut debeit hamikdash hashlishi mirumezet habirur de barzel. The third temple is hinted to in the purification or elevation of the impure iron, shelemata gam minechoshet, which is lower, cheaper, less significant even than copper. She'al yidei ze boim la'ashleimus de basel de kedusha. So let me just mention, I was at this Fabrengen when the Rebbe spoke about this, and it was fascinating. This next paragraph was fascinating to me. It was something that I hadn't heard before. The Rebbe brings an acronym for each of these metals, Zohav, Kesef, and Nechoshet. Now, now, so obviously, Zohav, Kesef, and Nechoshet, gold, silver, and copper, represent different value, different financial values, value as in worth. But the way the Rebbe presented it, they also represent emotional and psychological status, value. Okay, so when a person, they say when people talk about, writing a will, giving, what's going to happen with their money after their passing, etc. So some people say they'd rather give with a warm hand, right? They'd rather give away things, right, while they're alive, right? Why give after passing, right? When a person gives tzedakah, there are, in these three words, we have hinted 3 levels, 3 grades of investment. You have a person who's happy to give, loves giving, and they aren't expecting anything in return. In other words, a person, when they're not expecting anything in return because they don't need anything in return, right? When we say a person is healthy, to be emotionally healthy, psychologically healthy, means I'm not dependent on someone else to make me feel okay. I don't need another person to make me happy. I'm self-contained. So that's health. I'm not needy, right? A needy person is dependent, is not completely healthy. So the word zahav, the word gold, is an acronym for Ze Hanotein Bari. Someone who gives from a place of health. Someone who's healthy, they don't need anything, and they're giving tzedakah. Right? So that's the high. I don't mean the highest in the tzedakah, right? In levels of tzedakah, right? Some of you probably studied the Rambam, who says that if you give tzedakah to someone and he sees you, so that's one level. If you give tzedakah and he doesn't know who you are, that's better. Right? There are 7 levels, right? Lending money. We're not talking about those levels, but the level from your position. If a person feels like they're being held over a barrel, right? I'm hospitalized, God forbid, and the doctor is saying, I don't know, we need a miracle, so I think it's time to give charity, right? The pasuk says, tzedakah tatzil mimoves, tzedakah saves you from death. I think this is the right moment. Did I wait too long? Should I wait a little longer? Right? So the abbreviation for the word kesef, for the word silver, is kisheyesh sakanat pachad. Kisheyesh sakanat pachad. What does that mean? There is a fear of an impending harm, harm that's coming. So I'm okay right now, but I'm afraid of something coming my way. Maybe I'm afraid of a court case. I'm afraid of litigation. I'm afraid of, I don't know what's going to happen with that deal. So there's a fear. I'm okay, and I'm giving tzedakah, but I'm compromised. And then nechoshet, the word nechoshet, nitinat chole, the giving of a person who is ill. She'amar tnu, he said to others, he's already incapable of giving. He said to others, do me a favor, go take go take some of my money out here. I'll sign the check, you fill it out, go give it out to whoever it is. That's the nechoshet. Okay, let's read it inside.
Wait, sorry, can you repeat what the sentence is for the question?
Yeah, nitinat chole, she'amar tnu. So let's take a look. The word kesef, kisheyesh sakanat pachad. Danger. Fear. Yeah?
Does it have fear?
There's fear of a danger. right? Now, I'm going to mention that these abbreviations, the Rebbe didn't come up with these, right? They're from much earlier. The Rebbe is just citing, he's quoting something that we find in early Jewish texts. Okay, in the footnotes, he brings quite a few sources where this is brought from many years. So let's read it inside. Zahav, v'kesef unecheshes, gold, silver, and copper, hein, beseder de maila lamato, right? They follow an order. Shezahav hu hameshubach b'yoser. Gold is the best, the highest quality. Kesef ulamata mizahav, then silver, and then nechoshet, copper lamata gami kesef, less than silver. Umirumaz, it is hinted to in the Rashi Teves Shalahem, in their abbreviation. Zahav Rashi Teves Ze Hanoten Bari. Kesef Rashi Teves Kisheyesh Sakanas Pachad. Unechoshet Rashi Teves Nesinas Choyle Sheomar Tnu. Now, so how does this correspond to the three temples? I still want to get to the matriarchs in a second. Okay, it's very. So let's see if we could. So he says, Al Pize Yesh Lomar. So we could explain. Shezahav Moreh Al Hamishkan Ubayit Rishon Shehaya Bishlemut. The first temple and the tabernacle were complete. They had all the sacred items. There was nothing missing in the temple. Zeh Hanotein Bari. It was healthy. Kesef, silver. Moreh, it symbolizes Al Bayit Sheni, the second temple. Shechasrubo Chamisha Dvarim. There were 5 sacred items missing in the second temple. The ark was missing, right? The Urim V'Tumim, the correspondence with God, with the was also missing. Shelachein, therefore, because we're missing our support, Yesh Sakanat Pacha, there's fear. Are we supported? Is God behind us? Do we have the power that we used to have? Shema Yiyeh Eida Pam Hachesaron Chas V'Shalom. We're afraid maybe we'll lose more. Maybe we'll lose again. Maybe we'll lose the entire Beis Hamikdash. Then there's Nechoshet, copper. Moreh, it symbolizes Ala Maimed Umatzev Dizman Hagolos. It symbolizes the times of exile. Shebiglal HaChesaron, the Beis Hamikdash, because of that we don't have the temple, Na'asim B'nei Yisrael B'maimed Umatzev Shel Choleh She'omer Tnu. The Jewish people are in this state of like a person who's weak and ill. And we ask Hashem, give. We need your help. Right? It's like the fiddler on the roof, right? Shezohi habakosha vehadrisha me'akadosh baruch hu. We ask, we beg, we demand from God to give. What are we asking for? The third temple. Et bet Hamikdash hashlishi sheyiyeh betachlit hashleimut. That will be complete. Bayit nitzchi, forever, etc. Now, we're going to continue. In the third temple, I'm skipping a little bit, to Hay. Okay, you see page 234, the top of 234, the right column on the right. In the third temple, iron will be used. And the Rebbe says like this, we're not afraid of death anymore. Right? After Mashiach comes, we're not afraid of death. So this idea of being afraid of iron is removed. He says in the signon, in the jargon of Teres HaKabbalah v'Chasidus, right? In the jargon of Chasidus and Kabbalah, Yodua, it is known. Shebarzel, iron, is Rashi Teves, is an acronym for Bilha, Rachel, Zilpa, Leah. Neshe Yaakov, the wives of Yaakov, which are the imahot, the mothers of the Yud Beis Hashvatim. In other words, the entire Jewish people. Ukenegdon, corresponding to them, there's also 4 levels of impurity. I want to continue to the next paragraph. Ula Hosif, to add. Shegam Sidran, if you look at the order of the matriarchs, as it appears in this word, the maidservants come before the wives. Bilha lifnei Rachel, v'zilpa lifnei Leah, shivcha lifnei Gvirta. The maidservant before her mistress, which is the seder, which is the order of what is now impurity, of l'umat zeh, where a shivcha ki tirash Gvirta, where that the slave or the servant defeats his master, conquering, overthrowing, taking over. The Yesh Lomar, says the Rebbe, we could say, Shegam b'kedusha, also in holiness, Yeshno haseder de barzel, shivcha lifnei Gvirta lemal yusa. There's also an advantageous, a positive way of this type of dynamic. Ubehektim. By way of introduction, let's talk about, says the Rebbe, Ma'alat ha'imahot legabe ha'avot. What are the milas, the advantages? I feel like the word advantage is wrong. There's a better word. The qualities of the matriarchs over the patriarchs. Like it says by Avraham, Kol asher tomar elecha Sarah shma bekola. Everything Sarah tells you, listen to her. Shahoya Avraham tafel l'Sarah. Avraham was secondary to Sarah b'neviut, in prophecy. Al derech u bedugmas, similar to what we find, what will be when Mashiach comes. Shenekeva tisovev gever, that the woman will dominate the man. So the patriarchs had a taste of redemption. So for them, they already experienced the dominance of their wives having an advantage over them. I'm going to the next paragraph, Al Derech Zeh, the last column. Al Derech Zeh, v'nogea l'ma'alat hashfachot l'gabei ha'gevirot. Let's look for a moment at the qualities that the maidservants had over their mistresses. I'm skipping the parentheses. What does it say by Rachel? Shenatna shifchata, she gave her maidservant to Yaakov. And it says, Ve'ibane gam onochi mimena, I will build a home through her. The Rebbe speaks about the Kabbalistic. I'm going to read it through. Sheha'imaot hein b'chinat malchus da'atzilus. They represent a particular spiritual realm. V'ashfachot hein b'chinat malchus b'iridasa levya. V'al zeh ne'emar, even ma'asu habonim hayta lerosh pina. Sheha'avot shebonim hamalchut al yidei nisueihem imaot. The patriarchs, by building their malchus, building their kingdom, they didn't want to marry the maidservants. But nevertheless, the maidservants are where their homes were built to completion. Afal pikein, dafka al yidei nisueim im hashvachot, nase binyan v'aliyas hamalchus betachlis hashlemus. It was only through the maidservants that they had the completion of the 12 tribes.
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
Oh, it's a abbreviation for the three spiritual worlds. Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. Yeah, okay. I want to like tie this up. I'm just thinking of okay. I'll tie it up from this angle here for a minute. You know, you you're learning about Mashiach today, the Gemara says that Yaakov didn't pass away. Yaakov lo met. Yaakov didn't die. What his children are alive, he's alive. So I want to offer a little interpretation today. What that means. Avraham had his own path. He had his own his way, his influence. One of the, I don't want this to be misunderstood, but one of the things about kind people is that they want to be known as kind people. It's important to them that people know that they're kind. People know that they're nice. Avraham and Yitzchak both had their, not agenda, but they had a path that they represented something on their own behalf. Yaakov, it says he reached every child, but it wasn't only that he reached every child. Yaakov, his purpose wasn't himself. His purpose was his children. His life wasn't about him. In other words, that balance that we spoke about before, living in a state of balance, means that I don't represent any extreme. A person who has a particular belief, there will be times when they'll be tested, and a little bit, some extremism will emerge. I'm being tested. So for a person to always remain in a state of balance, it's because it's not about them. They don't have their own agenda. It's about reaching the people. And for reaching the people, balance is more suited. So when we say, and Yaakov lived, for Yaakov, his living is that there's a continuation, even more than Avraham and Yitzchak. So we say Yaakov lived. Why? Because his children are alive. That's all he was about. His whole purpose was his children. All this, when we talk about spiritual energy, the difference between the patriarchs and the matriarchs, between the avot and the imahot, is that the avos, the avot represent the ideas, but the mothers, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, they implement them. I have a model, but implementing the model. It's not the abstract, it's not the plans. The avos, they have a plan. But the imahot, they brought the plan to fruition. They utilized the plan. They applied the plan. So the idea of Mashiach, the idea of the third temple versus the first two temples, is that the first temples, this idea of pilgrimage, that everyone leaves their land and leaves the fields and everyone goes to the Beis Hamikdash. We're going to see godliness. We're going to separate ourselves from the earthy, from the mundane, and now we're going to a place of holiness. But the idea of the third temple is not to go away from, but that everything in the world is holy. In the temple, we have iron. We have objects that used to symbolize death. Nothing is an interference. Nothing gets in the way of connecting with God. Nothing is impure. There is no impurity. And that, look, at the end of the day, Yaakov himself was still studying Torah. In other words, raising the family, living in the world, was still happening through his wives. Raising the children was still the matriarchs. The idea of barzel, the idea of iron, this unwavering quality of understanding that godliness permeates everything. I'll just say this as an analogy. You know, people talk about and we could spend more time. I don't know. People talk about the importance of that in today's day and age. We don't push anyone away. We have to bring everyone closer. Right? In the Frum community, one of the challenges that parents have is that if their children stray and they have they want to keep their other children observant, and they have someone in the house that's not observant, and it's complicated. So there are people who work with families to try to help them to embrace and express love to any child, no matter what, and to welcome them and so on. But what happens? Every day you meet someone and they say, of course you're supposed to welcome everyone and embrace everyone, but even this and this person, even someone who did something so terrible. Right? In other words, what do you mean? Do you know my child? He connected the exhaust of his car to our house, and he turned it on hoping all of us would die. I'm going to embrace him too. Right? And everyone has the miniature version of that story. Like in their mind, there's a limit. Godliness, all very nice. But at a certain point, it doesn't work. At a certain point, there is impurity in the world. Rabbi, isn't there anything that should be rejected? There are bad people, aren't there? Do you agree? So what do we do with the bad people? The idea of barzel, the idea of iron, is what do you mean? Iron represents death. Right? It's the antithesis. Torah is life. We say in davening, Torat Chaim. The Torah of life. Torah embraces life as a value. The ultimate value. And then what do we say here? What does the sword symbolize? It symbolizes death. This you're going to bring in. I mean, this is part. This is the child. This is the black sheep. We got to let it. So, the avos, the patriarchs, had a limit. Even though Yaakov was amazing and he reached his grandchildren and everything, not for now, right? But still, and the imahot, the matriarchs, what they represent is recognizing that reaching everywhere. There is nothing that cannot be part of the Beis Hamikdash. Nothing is excluded from being the temple, and that's the going back to the beginning of the Sikha. That's the hint of the third temple in the original prophecy to Ezekiel. The iron represents destruction, but it also represents the building of the third temple. Because ultimately, for the third temple, even iron will be embraced. Yeah.
I thought Shidi was sent away to their children.
Yeah. You're saying Sarah and Rivka. So that's why in the Rosh Tevis, that's why we have Yaakov's wives in Barzel, not Avraham and Yitzchak. Right? In other words, it's still part of the process. Their greatness, Sarah's greatness over Avraham was in prophecy. Right? Rivka, we see that when they davened, right, when they prayed for a child, she was answered. Right? The bracha came to her. Right? So they had their advantages were expressed in their way, but ultimately the third Beis Hamikdash only corresponds to Yaakov, not to in the expression in the Talmud, it's not like Avraham, not like Yitzchak, rather it's like Yaakov. So that's a very strong expression. Anyway, okay. Yeah.
Can you just clarify what is it that the wives of Yaakov would do that's beyond the one that's about Yaakov?
That is there anything in the world that can't be part of the Dira? Is there anything in the world that can't be part of a dwelling place for Hashem? So iron can't be. What do you mean? It's the antithesis of life. And anything that, in other words, anything that they would look at and say, one second, there's a limit. In the structure of the third temple, there will be iron.
But the wives themselves, what is it that they do?
That, in other words, that's what it represents. Right?
I understand what it represents, but I don't understand what they did on that.
Oh, so we're not talking about like a story in Chumash. What we're saying is that Yaakov, Yaakov only was represented the idea, but the actual life. That was he lived his life through his wives, right? Without his wives, he couldn't. I don't mean build a family, but his message wouldn't reach the world. The idea of Malchus in Bia, right? The idea of Malchus going down to Bia is application, right? So, and Evan Masu Abainim, this pasuk that the cornerstone that the builders disgraced became the stone that the builders disgraced became the cornerstone that represents the maidservants. So that became their binyan. Okay. Have a good day, everybody. We'll see you. Thank you. Okay.